Milling Through History presents The 9-Day Queen. The name Jane Grey might not be one people are very familiar with. In fact, she is a rather unique individual in history, as she was a monarch whose reign ended before it even had a chance to begin. Born October 1537, Jane Grey was the eldest daughter of the Duke of Suffolk, Henry Grey. Perhaps one of the most unique aspects to her is the fact that she would prefer to be educated as compared to pursuing other womanly pursuits of the time. Now, in Tudor England at this point, women were oftentimes found to be reciting poems, dancing, sewing. But Jane Grey preferred to actually learn things about history, politics, law, and this made her mind a rather unique one. She became a devout Protestant and soon found herself going to the home of Thomas Seymour and Catherine Parr. Now, Catherine Parr was the last wife of Henry VIII and also an extremely devout Protestant. And so from the years 1547 to 1548, Jane Seymour was a lady-in-waiting to Catherine Parr. But her service would come to an end, as Catherine would pass away during childbirth. As a result, the future of Jane Grey became rather unknown. What was to happen to her? Thomas Seymour saw in Jane an opportunity. He believed she would make an excellent bride to the monarch, Edward VI. Now, Edward VI ended up passing on Jane Grey, and as a result, this meant that while she was rebuked by the king, she was still at least well considered, for instead of getting a king, she got Lord Guilford Dudley. Now, what makes this man so interesting is that he was the son of the Duke of Northumberland, and Northumberland was the second most powerful man in England, just behind the king. In 1553, Edward VI would lie dying on his bed, and as such, he knew that his time in this world was very short. His greatest concern was the issue of the line of succession, who was to follow him after he died. According to articles that were written up by his father, it would be Edward's half-sister Mary who would ascend to the throne upon his death. The only problem was Mary was a Catholic, and Edward had spent his entire reign building the Protestant Church of England. As such, he could not afford to have a religious shift from Protestant to Catholic, and needed another Protestant to continue on his legacy. His decision to choose Jane Grey was specifically due to her devoutness as a Protestant, and as such, he would begin to supervise his will, and declared he wanted Jane Grey to become his heir, and all successive children by her, specifically males, to become kings of England after her. The plan was to make his intentions public and known to Parliament in September, when they would come together in London to meet. However, Edward died July 10th of 1553, nearly 2 months before Parliament was to meet. As a result, it was only his draft will which dictated that Jane was to become queen, and his own word that people had to rely upon. As such, from July 10th to July 19th, 1553, Jane Grey would be Queen of England. Now, this isn't to say that the king could just simply pick any regular person to become the next monarch. Instead, there had to be some kind of connection between Jane Grey and the monarchy itself to at least provide legitimacy. In the case of Jane, her claim to royal ascent came from her mother Frances, who was the daughter of Princess Mary, the younger sister of King Henry VIII. And once Jane found out she was queen, she knew that her greatest threat would be that of Mary, Edward's older half-sister. Now, Mary had moved herself into East Anglia in order to gather supporters to put her onto the throne. As such, the 9-day reign of Jane Grey proved to be a very difficult one, mainly because there was so much political upheaval that one did not know what was going to happen next. The Duke of Northumberland attempted to prevent Mary from taking the throne away from Jane. However, a coup d'etat would occur within the Privy Council. Henry FitzAlan engineered the coup, which overthrew Jane, by basically playing off the concerns of the Catholics and the Protestants. As such, for the Catholic supporters of Mary within the council, all he had to do was point out the fact that Mary has already been assigned by the line of ascension from Henry VIII. Therefore, she is the rightful monarch. And as Catholic supporters within the Privy Council saw that, well, she is a legitimate heir as compared to a girl who has effectively just said, yes, I'm the ruler, then it was easier to support Mary over Jane. With the Privy Council quickly abandoning Jane, Parliament would declare Mary Queen by July 19th. As a result of this, Jane Grey was arrested for the crime of treason. At her trial, the primary piece of evidence to prove her guilt was the number of documents she signed where she indicated that she was Jane, the Queen. Now, because she was doing this, and Mary was declared the rightful ruler of England, this made Jane the usurper of the throne. Having been found guilty of treason, she was to be executed by burning or beheading, dependent upon which way the Queen decided to actually go with. But Mary decided that killing Jane Grey would not be the best option. Instead, she would be in prison for the rest of her life in the Tower of London. Now, while Jane and her husband Guilford found themselves now permanent residents to the Tower of London, she had hoped that perhaps staying there would not be the worst thing in the world. But the rebellion of Thomas Wyatt the Younger, in an attempt to prevent Mary's marriage to Philip II of Spain, proved to be her own downfall, as Queen Mary saw in this rebellion an attempt by a number of nobles to overthrow her and restore Jane to the monarchy. To further complicate the matters, Jane's own father and two brothers were part of this rebellion, and as such, Mary realized she had no choice but to get rid of Jane Grey. On February the 12th, 1554, the execution of Jane Grey was to occur. The first one to be executed was Guilford Dudley, and his death caused Jane a great deal of heartbreak. But Queen Mary offered an olive branch. Jane could renounce the Protestant faith, convert to Catholicism, and have her life spared. But Jane refused. As such, Jane was led to the square of execution, and as she was brought up, she was blindfolded. But as she attempted to put herself down into a position where her head would rest on the block to get cut off, she could not find the block. As such, the Deputy Lieutenant of the Tower, Sir Thomas Bridges, had to assist Jane by putting her head onto the block so then the executioner could cut off her head. The final words of Jane Grey were, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." And as such, Jane Grey would be seen as a Protestant martyr, and her legacy would continue to grow as the years went by, culminating in the movie Lady Jane, starring Helena Bonham Carter. For more information, please consider these suggested titles. Be sure to click on the left-hand side of the screen to subscribe to our show, and on the right-hand side for our latest episode. And we will see you again for the next episode of Milling Through History.